All right, what's up everyone? This is Don with Third Creative, and this is the walkthrough tutorial video for Portal Multi-Sport Photoshop template. And in this video, I'm going to thoroughly walk you through all of the layers, all the processes, and hopefully cover anything and everything that you might need to know in order to create the best images possible with this design. Working with the 4x5 vertical file, just keep in mind that for the most part, anything and everything that we do here is going to apply to the other files as well. There may be a few intricacies that we can cover towards the end, but for the most part, everything is the same. It's always a good idea when you first open a new template to just start turning off and on different layers. Just see where everything lives, get an idea of how it's structured. I feel like that helps out. But let's jump all the way to the bottom layer folder entitled background layers. We're going to open that up and start at the very bottom layer. Here we have our lower background color, so it's referring to this bottom or lower section, which is white. If you want to change that lower section color, double click the little icon here, and you can use your color picker and pick any color that you want. So right out of the gate, we get to highlight a mistake that I made, an oversight. As you can see, this doesn't look good. There's a very subtle grass texture that I have here, which is optional. I have it set up where it looks perfect with white, but not if you were to choose any other color. So let's go ahead and commit that. I wish I would have caught that, because all it is changing the blend mode. It's very simple. So I can update the files so that anybody that downloads it from here forward doesn't have to do this. But if you have a version prior and it looks like this, just come up to this layer right here, subtle grass texture. Come up here to this blend mode drop down menu, and you can choose darken or probably multiply, and it should look right. So my mistake there. I'm always good for a few. Let's go ahead, and that's how you would change the color. Let's go ahead and get it back to white. I think more often than not, you're probably going to leave it white, but occasionally you might want to change that. Next, we have a subfolder entitled Upper Background. So it's referring to this darker section up here. You'll notice towards the middle it's kind of a lighter gray. Towards the edge it gets a little bit darker, and that is because I used a gradient overlay rather than a solid color. So if you are not familiar with gradient overlays, it's not too complicated. Double click the word gradient overlay to open up your layer style panel. It should automatically be on gradient overlay, and if you see this little section here, this is the current gradient that we have. If you click in there, it'll open up your gradient editor. Now, I have a ton of gradients, so you may have one that you can just click on and roll with, but if you don't, then you'll be looking at this bottom section here. You'll see these 4 squares here, and what I do is I start with this bottom left one, just click it, and you'll see this color box here. Now this is the darker color, so it's going to be the color that's out towards the edge, the left side here. So if you wanted to change it, let's just say that we want navy blue. Now you might be able to use your color picker, to select something off of the image. I'm just going to pick a random color that kind of is in the ballpark that I'm looking for. All right, we'll go with that for the darker color, and then come over to the right hand side, the lower right square here, and we're basically going to do the same thing, but we're going to go a little lighter. And you just kind of play around with those 2 colors until you get it just right. But it just adds a little bit more. It doesn't look as flat if you were to use just a solid color. And that's all there is to it. I'm going to cancel that so that it doesn't apply. Now I put that in this subfolder here because I wanted to clip this texture to it. And anytime you have a layer with a layer style like color overlay or gradient overlay, if you clip something to it, it doesn't show up. So I have to put it in this subfolder here if anybody ever wonders why I do it that way. That is the reason. But this is very subtle, and in fact, you may not be able to see it very well unless I zoom in. So I'll go ahead and zoom in so you can see it. Now, this is a topographical texture. It is optional. If you choose to use this for a sport other than golf, then it may not fit. It may not be right. It's personal taste probably, but I think any outdoor sport like cross country, golf, you know, where it's supposed to represent like a topographical map, elevation changes, things like that. But it looks cool. You can turn it off if you don't want it, as you can see. If you do decide to use it, it's just my opinion, and a tip is to not get too crazy with it. Double click the word color overlay and just keep it very subtle. Keep it very close to the background color, as you can see that I've done here. So it does show, but if I were to, you know, do a super contrasting color, then you can see it just gets a little too busy, in my opinion, too distracting. So just try to pick a color that's just a little bit lighter than the darker color, or a little bit darker than the lighter color, or where it just subtly show on the left and the right side here. And you kind of see it gets lost in here because it's pretty much the same exact color. But just keep it subtle is my advice. Next, we have a background paper texture. I'm going to scroll down. You can see it subtly in here if I really zoom in, but it's darker, so it's harder to see than here on the white bottom portion. You can reduce the opacity of this if you want to. You can play with the levels if you wanted more or less contrast, or you could even turn it off. But it's there, and just adds a little extra detail to it. And that is all of the layers that are enclosed in this bottom background layers folder. So we'll close it up and we'll move on to this next layer folder, which is entitled Circle Window Layers. Pretty self-explanatory. Here in the upper right hand portion we have this circle, and that's where we have this nice AI generated golf course image. We'll open up the folder and we'll see what we have inside here. Let's go all the way to the bottom. So the very bottom two layers are blue here because you can change the colors, and it's for these little stroke outlines that you see. I've got gray and I've got red. So if you want to change the colors, just double click on the word stroke, and this is the outer one, which is red, and click this little box and you can go with any color you want. Another tip is that you can play with the size. So if you want it to be a little bit more prominent, you can increase the size if you want to. It's an option. Same thing with the next one. It's just, this is the gray, this is, first one was the red. Pretty simple. Next we have our circle layer, change color with gradient overlay. So here's where I need to explain a few things. This is basically the circle shape itself. I have it in a subfolder that has the inner shadow on it. So you can kind of barely see up here. There's a inner shadow. You can actually, I turned off the wrong thing. You can kind of see, just adds a little dimension. But basically you wouldn't need to change the color or the gradient of this unless you were not going to clip an image to it. So I have this golf course that I created in Midjourney clipped here. If I were to turn it off, now we can see the color of the gradient overlay that I have here. So if you double click, you can see we just talked about gradient overlays, but you can change the gradient to any color scheme that you want. Which ties us into, or leads us into, the next thing, which is the option to not clip a scenic image to this section. If you decide you just want to use one of these, what I have like 4 text options in here. I'm just going with a single letter with 4 different font options, and so the H stands for holiday, which is the team that this is for. You can change it to any other, but I'll go ahead and turn off. They are also have color gradient overlays. If you don't want to do that, you can switch to a solid color. It's pretty subtle here, but in some instances you may want to stick with the gradient. But it has different font options, very similar script fonts with the exception of this last one, which is a more classic collegiate block letter style. We'll turn that off and go back to the first one. There are some extra features. You can turn on different strokes that are built in. You can change colors. You can turn on the inner shadow. Got a color overlay. What do we have? We have drop shadows. If you want to add some dimension, you can turn these different layers on and off, or you can keep it very simple. Completely up to you. Here we have a gloss overlay, so you can kind of see it looks like a glossy highlight. You can reduce the opacity if you want a little less of the effect if you want to, or you can turn it off altogether. But it's there, and it's an option if you want to use it. Here we have our one scenic image option that I included. I originally intended on having all sorts of AI generated options for different sports in here, and I decided to go ahead and put the template out with just golf because as I was working with Midjourney, I was finding that golf was easy to come up with an image for, but all the other sports that I was trying was pretty difficult, and I was being pretty particular about the images. Basically anything with AI, if you need like specific lines, it doesn't get it right. So if you need like a basketball court, volleyball court, even baseball fields, you know, at a first glance you may not notice anything, but if you look at it, you'll notice all sorts of things that just aren't right about it. And so I'm going to keep trying and see what I can add to it, but for now you have a golf course option built in that you can turn off and go with a more simple look. Clean, still looks good in my opinion, but you have those options. Another option that you have is if you want to drop in your own, maybe you create an AI image that you like and you want to use it. Maybe you take a photograph of this particular team's home playing field or court or location. Maybe you find a stock image out there somewhere that you want to use. You can drop in your own, which I can demonstrate. I found this, or I have this AI indoor swimming pool for swim. You can see one of the things I'm talking about. You know, this lane divider just ends right here. Doesn't make any sense. So you get the idea. But for demonstration purposes, all you have to do is drag, drop, and I'm going to make it a smart object, and that way it does not do anything destructive as I'm making it larger, making it smaller. We also want to right click, and somewhere in here there is a create clipping mask. There it is. And that will clip it to the circle shape so it doesn't show up. Now we need to scale and size and position it. So I clicked on one of the corner anchor points. I need to hold down shift on my computer in order to maintain the proportions. So just make sure that you're not stretching it, and I'm going to make it fit just right. Now you just kind of move it where you think it looks good, and it still fills in the entire circle. So I don't know. This is just a demonstration, so I'll go with that. So there you go. Now you have an option for another sport if you have an image that you want to drop in. Same thing applies to school logos. I'm not going to demonstrate that, but if you have a PNG file, a school logo, or maybe even a flat image that would work that will fill the space, you can drop that in there. All sorts of options. But that is the circle window layers. Let's close that up. Next, we have our vertical subtext. Now you'll notice it's over here. I have Eagle Golf 2024. This is very simple, straightforward. If you want to change it, you just double click right here on the letter T in your layer panel. It'll highlight everything. Now, I think more often than not, you're going to want to have two different colors. It just looks more aesthetic. So what you'll want to do with the entire thing highlighted is click and drag to highlight the text that you want to change the color to. And let's say we were going to go with, you know, some sort of blue. You can click OK. Now you can click and drag over, in this case, the year, and change it to the color that you want. Click OK. And that's how you can change the colors, but still have two different colors. Let's undo that. While you're doing that, I probably should have demonstrated, you know, something else. So if you did bulldog swim, same thing, same idea, and then change the color. Pretty simple. Next, we have our upper framed subject layers. Let's open that up and take a look. So down at the very bottom, we have this rectangular frame behind the subject. So that's this rectangle shape. The color is controlled with a gradient overlay, as you can see here. And then we also have a drop shadow. If I turn that off, you can see that it makes it look like, you know, it stands out from the background, a little dimension. You can play with the drop shadow if you choose or wish to. Otherwise, probably the only thing you want to do here is possibly change the gradient colors. And so we've already talked about this. It's the same thing. Pick one you already have, or click here, change this color, then click here and change this color. But you get the idea. Hey, there's a nice terrible one for an example, but let's see. Yeah, you get the idea of all of these. And that is how you control the color for the background shape. Next, I have a upper subject images. So this is a subfolder where you will place your subject images. Now you notice this has a layer mask, and this layer mask is set up so that your subject doesn't show beyond the borders of this shape, with the exception of the top. Now, I've already received some emails and messages asking how to adjust this, because some people do want, like for example, his golf clubs might stick out there. If you want that to show, it's not hard to adjust this. Just make sure that you click on this layer mask here. There's a few different ways that you can do it. You could use the brush with white to reveal. Make sure that your opacity and flow is 100%. In this case, I'm using a soft round, and you just paint in where you want it to show. I'm going to undo that. Another option that you have with your mask selected is, what is this called? The marquee tool. So you can just click and drag to highlight the area that you want. Anything that falls in that area you want to show. So again, make sure you have white selected for reveal. Black would conceal. In this case, you can use your paint bucket and just click in here. So but now anything in this section will show. And you can come over here and you can do the same exact thing on this side. That's cutting it a little close. I think I got it to overlap. And same thing, use your paint bucket. Click in there, anything will come out. Now, that's where it starts to look weird. Anything on the bottom, it just, to me, that just doesn't look right. So just be careful there. In that case, you might end up using your paintbrush to paint in and paint out what you want. Obviously, these are some manual processes, so more often than not, you probably would leave it the way that it is, so that only the top would anything exceed the boundaries of the shape. But definitely wanted to cover that because I've gotten several questions. Next, we have a color grade option, which is optional. It doesn't always look good and look right, but basically I have a solid color overlay, and I have it set to soft light, and this one, it's at 20%. Now, if I were to do 100%, you can see what it does. That's way too much. So you may want more, you may want less than the 20. You can play around with it, but if I leave it at 20, if I turn it off, the image doesn't look bad, but if you turn it on, to me, it looked a little bit better. It tied it into that red, that deep red background. Let's get rid of that selection there. Just looks a little better, and you can play around with the color. This is kind of on the orange, more red side of orange, but you can go a little more towards the yellows. If you have a blue, you might try cool. You know, just play around with it, see what it looks like. You start getting into pinks and greens, it's probably not going to look good at all. So usually cool colors and warm colors is where you want to go. It's just a built-in color grade option. If you don't want it, just turn it off. And that is it for the upper framed subject layers. Next, we have that subtle grass texture that I was telling you about. If you don't have an athlete full body down here that doesn't play on a grass surface, just turn it off. It still looks good, but it is there. And remember that if you do change the background to anything other than white, to make sure that you change this blend mode to multiply if it isn't already. Next, we have our lower text layers. So we'll take a look at that. First name, it's pretty self-explanatory. Now the way that I have it set up, it's a little bit manual. You notice it kind of just fits. Let's go with the move tool. It just kind of fits right in there. You know, so if I had it all the way above, it doesn't look quite as good. I have to position it the way that I want it, excuse me. So if his name was Jonathan, the best look is going to be to have it fall right in there. So it just depends on if you're doing this manually or if you're using automation. But that is how that is set up. It's just a regular color. There's no gradients or anything. Same with the last name. It's just a solid color that you can change and edit. Really simple, really straightforward. All right, next we have our subtext, which is basically senior, junior, sophomore, freshman. You can change it to something else if it applies, but I have those built in. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And let's see, there is a paper texture clip to it, and that was just so that it would apply to the last name as well. What's next? Lower subject. Let's take a look. Basically, you just have your lower subject in here. If you're doing full body, which this template is more ideal for, you'll want to paint in a little, use a soft brown black brush at lower opacities and kind of paint in some ground shadows just to ground them. But this is where you would place your lower full body subject images. Now, you may want to hide feet. If you do, it's pretty simple. Maybe I should have just added this in here, but you can just come down here and click on this. It adds a gradient, or adds a layer mask. To make a gradient mask, you'll click your gradient tool. Make sure that you have black to white, white to black, and then just click and drag, and it will do a subtle mask. Now you may want to make this text bigger so it comes over here as well. You may want to do some things if you decide to do that, but if you absolutely don't want to show feet, you have options, and I just wanted to demonstrate that. And then of course we have our sun flare that you can turn on and off and move around, just depending on what background you have here. And then of course, you know, if your subject's face is closer to it, you don't want it to go over their face too much. So just keep an eye out on that. You may end up turning it off if you don't want to worry about it, but I think it adds a nice extra touch for this golf image. And that is pretty much all of the layers. Now I do want to cover a few other things real quick, show you some sample images. You have the option to do a single image here. So if you just want to do one image, you don't want to show feet, this is the way to go. You also have the option to do just a single image showing feet. Now there's two people here, but it could be just one. So I'll just show you how to do that real quick. Let's come over here. So first things first, if we were to turn off the lower subject here, we lose that full body, and now we would find our upper framed subject layers folder, this red one here. And let's see, we would want to hold down shift and click on vertical subtext so that we're holding onto that. We want to have our move tool as well. And let's see, we want our lower text layers. So we'll hold down Command or Control and click there. So you can see we have these 3 layers or layer folders selected. And now we'll just kind of drag it over. To center it. And what we might even do, I'm going to hold down shift and click on this anchor point, make it bigger. Something like that. We'll commit it. Now you might want to go and select just the lower text layers by themselves, scale them, position them how you want them. But that's pretty easy, pretty straightforward. Let's back up. Okay. And the other way around, we can turn off the upper frame subject here, and then we would grab our circle window layers that we have here, and I'm going to click on this bottom anchor point and just drag this over, and probably a little too big, so I'm going to hold down shift, click on this middle anchor point, click and drag up, and you can play around with it. Get it how you want. Try to make sure that it's centered. And then now if you take your lower subject, you just scale and position them how you want. I'm doing this very quickly, so it may not be exactly how I would do it. And then we would want to move our vertical text. So we might want to move that. Won't be too close to the edge. So I think what I'll do is just scale this circle down a little bit more. Bring it down a little bit. Maybe something like that. Center it. And then just have this off just a little bit. Something like that. So just moving some layers around, turning some off. It's not hard. Pretty simple to move those around and get those different looks. And that is it for the vertical 4x5 file. I'm going to jump over to a horizontal file and show you a couple things real quick, and we'll wrap this up. Okay, so I've got a 5x4 horizontal file pulled up, and really everything is pretty much exactly the same. You'll notice that I have 2 different colors showing in the background, and that's only because I have this circle centered, and it just looked a little bit better. So if we come down to the very bottom inside this background layers folder, we'll have 2 subfolders, the left and the right, but everything is the same. For the left you use a gradient, for the right if you open up this folder you also use a gradient. So you just have 2 sides to change the colors of. One other thing that I wanted to touch on, it's not really set up for it, but I've been getting questions. I understand not everybody wants to have feet, or you may have just too many people to put in this team image to include feet. So if you want to hide feet, here's how I would probably do it. I would click on the circle window layers, and I would give ourselves a little bit more room. So I'm going to, with my move tool selected, click on the middle anchor point, hold down shift and drag up. You can always adjust this more if you want to later. I'll just commit with that. Now on our subject images, I will add a layer mask. Just select your subject images folder, come down here and click this icon to add a layer mask. Now go to your gradient tool, make sure that you have black to white selected, and with that mask selected, click and drag down. I'm going to hold shift to keep it straight, and you can just adjust these 2 points here depending on where you want it. So if you want to move it up, move the bottom up, then move the top. Pretty simple, but this allowed you to fade the feed out. If you need to do rows, you just create folders, subfolders. So I would come down here, add a folder. This would be first row. You can add another folder for second row, and then you would just be adding these layer masks to each row so that their feet fade out into transparency. I know that's not very thorough, but it's the gist of it. And you may want to do a few other things, like maybe move the team name and subtext down, maybe scale it up, and then have your subjects come up. You can move things around, make it work. So just wanted to touch on that, but I think that's it. I'm not going to explain the Memory Mate. You can look at any previous tutorial video. They're pretty much as a demo in there, but basically just create your 4x5 team image and drag and drop it in, scale and position it on the canvas how you want it. It's pretty simple and straightforward. And that is all that I have. Probably have forgot something, and if I didn't cover something, let me know. Shoot me a message, send me an email, don@thirdcreative.com. Always happy to help out when I can. But that's all I have for this one. It's time to move on to the next one. So until next time, I'll see you.